So as we come into the time frame of Thanksgiving, we're talking about gratitude. And right now, it's kind of hard when you look around with all of the things that are going on and all of the things that are happening. We become a group of people that really like to grumble and complain. And so what ends up happening a lot of times when we don't realize something. Do you realize that grumbling and complaining is poison? What ends up happening is when we grumble and complain about things, it begins to poison our heart of who we are. And we forget about the gratitude that we actually owe and the thankfulness that we owe to God. And it's so easy sometimes to just go around and just grumble. I mean, we look at it. Every time we go to the store, we pick up something. And what do? We complain because last week it wasn't the same price, it was cheaper. We go to the gas station, one day it's $3.29. That was about 2 years ago. And then we look and it's $3.89. And then we hear them say, well, it's going to get worse. And we hear them say, well, so-and-so is going to do this or so-and-so is going to do that. And we begin to just grumble and complain about everything. And what ends up happening, ladies and gentlemen, is it poisons us. And all of the things. In the 1990s, there was a series of movies, actually 2 of them. And Hollywood did these movies up really well. And I'm going to give you a couple of descriptive words about these movies, okay? And so tell me if you can remember the title of these movies, okay? The movies was all about complaining, negativity, intolerance, uncompromising, griping, fussing, and grumpiness. And these characters are known because of their magnetic characteristics. Does anybody want to take a guess? Grumpy old men. There was 2 of them. There was grumpy old men and grumpier old men. They starred two gentlemen, Walter Matthau and John Lemon. And because it was in Hollywood, they could do this movie, and they got away with exaggeration on how grumpy these guys was, of their attitudes, their behaviors. And what happened was, these 2 guys, Walter Matthau and John Lemon, who were grumpy old men, were able to get by being grumpy because of the comedy. It became famous. And everybody would laugh at these grumpy old men all the time, thinking that, well, they're okay. They can do that. And so what ends up happening is, if you think about it, no one really likes to spend any time with a complainer. Have you ever been around somebody that all they do is complain all the time? How long do you like to stay there? There are sometimes you'd like to tell them, could you go home? Or you end up doing something, or what you do is you text somebody and say, hey, can you call me real quick? And tell them that it's an emergency or whatever, to get me away from this person, because all they're doing is just complaining. And the next thing you know, you're complaining too. And you're catching yourself doing the same thing. Well, can I tell you something? Studies have shown that there is nothing more detrimental to your health than a bad attitude. And so some of you like to stay sick all the time. You come up and say, how you doing? Terrible. Pastor, the whole world's just caving in on me. Well, how about we change your attitude? Why? I like it. You like to be sick? Yeah, I like to be sick. Because when I'm sick and grumpy, I like everybody else to be sick and grumpy. And so the next thing you know, the attitude is just out there. And we kind of laugh, but you know the Bible is filled with illustrations like this. One of the things that we need to learn is a thing called ingratitude. Webster defines ingratitude as the failure or the refusal to acknowledge receipt of something good from someone else or from another. There are times, you think about it, in your life. Are you alive right now? Some of you all don't know. Okay. I think everybody here is breathing. And as long as you're breathing, I think that classifies that you are alive, right? If we had a stethoscope, I think we might be able to get a heartbeat, and I probably could get a pulse out of probably about 95% of you. Some of the other ones, we might not get that. But ingratitude is not being able to accept something from someone. Do you know that right now there's a lot of people in hospitals, nursing homes, that would love to be sitting where you're sitting? They would love to be able to speak like you do, breathe like you are. And yet so many times, what do we find ourselves doing? Complaining. I ache. That's called living. We're going to ache. It isn't always wellness and everything. And sometimes we forget about these things. And there are some times that we forget, and we're complaining so much that we don't even recognize the goodness that God is placing in our lives. We're so caught up in the negativity. We watch so much social media. We watch so much TV, news. Eugene keeps telling me, he says, Pastor, you need to stay off social media. Pastor, you need to quit watching the news. And sometimes we do. Because there's so much out there that really begins to drag you down and irritate you. And certain things that are happening. If you go back to the Bible, and let's start. There were two guys by the name of Cain and Abel. Two brothers. They were both offering sacrifices to God. But yet what ended up happening was that God accepted Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's. And Cain is watching as God is blessing Abel and not blessing him. And he gets angry, saying, God, why aren't you accepting my offering? And God says, because of your attitude. The attitude in which you're giving it. You're not giving the first fruits, you're giving the leftovers. You're not thankful for what I gave you. Your whole attitude of sacrificing is not what it was supposed to be. And so what began to happen was, because Cain got this ungrateful spirit, just kept brewing and brewing and brewing in his heart. The next thing you know, what ends up happening was his thoughts became nothing but killing. I'm going to kill my brother. And he did. because of the ingratitude or ingratitude of what God had given him and not being thankful. Go to another story, King David. King David, you talk about a blessed life. He had it. A little shepherd boy on the backside of the mountain watching the sheep. And all of a sudden, the prophet comes up and anoints him as king. He goes to visit his brothers. Goliath comes before them, and the soldiers are all afraid. And here's a little shepherd boy with nothing but a slingshot and 5 smooth stones who took out the giant, cut off his head, and became the hero of the nation of Israel. He became king, and God blessed him. He built a kingdom, and God was continuing to bless him. He had a wife and a child. Everything in his life was one of those lives that you wish that you had had. Until one day, instead of he, the king, being out on the battlefield with his men, he went to the top of the roof and he saw a woman on the next roof bathing, cleaning, and instead of his eyes being diverted away from what he saw, his eyes got fixated on her, and the next thing, his jealousy, he wanted her. And because of that, he ends up losing a son, a baby. His whole family began infighting. And the rest of his reign that God wanted to bless became nothing but destruction. Because why? He wasn't grateful to what was there. And so can I say this to you? That what happens, ladies and gentlemen, is when we become ungrateful, we start a slippery slide of sin. And we keep going. Because may I say this to you, that path is greased. And Satan's got it greased well. But God wants us to slow down. So, let me start with this. And we'll start the sermon. You thought I had already started. That's just the warm up. Exodus chapter 16. Let me give you an overview of this. In Exodus chapter 16, the children of Israel have been brought out of Egypt. They were traveling in the land, and they had left Israel, or they had left Egypt. So they had been traveling for 40 days. And then after this 40 days of traveling, of coming out of Egypt, their resources began to start drying up. And what do? They started getting hungry. God had taken care of them. He told them, hey, you need to get out of here and get out of here quick. And they grabbed everything that they could and they just took off. But they had enough resources for 40 days. Now the 40 days is running out. They're starting to get hungry. And they're complaining. Why are you bringing us out here into this desert to starve? We had food back in Egypt. Matter of fact, we had good food. Yeah, we were in slavery, but we still had food. We had homes. Everything was great and wonderful. Hold on a minute. Weren't you guys complaining? that you wanted out of Egypt. And what did I do? I brought you out of Egypt. And what do you do? I've given you free passage. I brought you out of there. And what's happened is their excitement has wore out. How many times has God blessed you? And all of a sudden you find yourself no longer excited about what he just did. We soon forget what he gave us. In Exodus chapter 16 and verse number 2, look at what it says. It says the entire Israelite community grumbled. It didn't say half of them, 2/3. It said the entire community grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. They were the first ones to get 100% unanimous opinion. And they weren't running for anything. Everybody complaining against Moses and Aaron, the two leaders. Now look at verse number 3 in Exodus chapter 16. It says the Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt. Hold on a minute. For 40 days they've been traveling. God got them out of Egypt because they were going to die, they said. And so now they're going back and they're saying, if we could have only died there when we sat by pots of meat and ate all the bread that we wanted. Instead, you brought us into this wilderness and to make this whole assembly die of hunger. Lord, we want to go back to slavery, sit by the pots of meat, and grumble and complain. We can grumble and complain, but at least our bellies were full. And this is what's going on with them. And they're complaining about this. Verses 4-8. Look at what he says. Then the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. Hold on a minute. These people are nasty to God. They're grumbling and complaining about their situation. And what's God do? I'm going to be gentle to them. I'm going to rain down bread. Maybe God has done it once before. Did you ever think about it? When we start grumbling and complaining about the price of food, that would be awesome. If God would just, instead of us having to call HubGrub or GrubHub or DoorHub or HubDrub or whoever it is that we call, DoorDash, instead of us calling DoorDash, how about if we call God and say, hey, can you bring me some food? I think if God would deliver food, it would be better than whatever you get out of Kroger or Myers or anywhere else. But we grumble and we complain about so many things. And here they are complaining. And what does God do? I'm going to rain bread down from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. One day. What did God say? I don't want you going out there and grabbing enough bread to do you for a week. Because if you get enough bread for a week, you're going to get sick. Because that bread's going to go bad. I've got enough bread for you for one day. And today you get enough bread for that day. And then tomorrow, guess what I'm going to do? I have never seen it rain bread. But God has. And a whole nation of Israel saw it rain bread. So what does he say? This way I will test to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. How grateful are we when God gives us instructions? How well are we at following those instructions? Sometimes not so good. Verse number 5. On the 6th day, when they prepared what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So every day, 1 through 5, you gather enough for 1 day. On the 6th day, you gather up enough for 2 days. For the 6th day and for the Sabbath, because you're not going to get any for the Sabbath. It's going to be there for you, okay? So on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on the other days. Verse number 6. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, this evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. Verse number 7. And in the morning you will see the Lord's glory, because he has heard your complaints about him. For who are we that you complain about us? Verse number 8, Moses continued, the Lord will give you meat. Hold on, they've been eating bread all week. Here comes God. Now we're going to give you some meat this evening, and all the bread you want in the morning. For he has heard the complaints that you are raising against him. Who are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. You thought we were the ones that did this? No, We're just following the directions of God. And who are you complaining about? Not us, guys. You're complaining about God. And he's trying to tell you these things. So one of the things, have you ever took your kids aside and gave them an object lesson to help teach them something? This was Moses taking the children of the nation of Israel aside and giving them object lessons. Hey, you're complaining about us. It's not us you're complaining about. It's the Lord. Because he has given you bread every 6 days, or for 6 days. He's going to give you some meat tonight. And as a matter of fact, you can eat as much bread as you want today. There's going to be enough to fill your bellies. And then some. It's continuing to come down. And we'll see how grateful that you become. You know, one of the things that we don't understand, and that is this. Think about it for a minute. How long were the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness? "40 years. A whole generation. When you go back and you read about the children of Israel in the 40 years, I'm sure that Moses had a lot of stories that he could have wrote about during that period of those 40 years. But if you go back and you look at what he wrote, very little was written. I'm sure that in that 40 years, when this was just 7 days or 75 days out, within this short period of time, they're already grumbling and complaining. How much complaining do you think that they would have done in 40 years? I believe he could have wrote a whole book. What about your life? How long have you lived? How much complaining have you done? I find myself being caught up in this sometimes and thinking, okay, God, I need to stop, because this ungratefulness is bringing up a spirit within me that doesn't belong. Because God, you have blessed me so much that I could never, ever thank you enough for what you've done. And I don't want you to ever think that I'm ungrateful. But sometimes we need to step back and take an overall view of what God is doing in our lives. Because, can I say something to you? You know, a lot of times there's the old saying that we become who we hang around. And your parents will always tell you, don't hang around with this person, don't hang around with that person because they're bad news. They're going to get you into trouble. And you say, well, no, I can change them. You know. Well, can I share with you that in the Bible, it tells us that we become what we behold. In Moses understands that. You see, if all you see is anger, guess what you become? You become one angry person. And guess what? Nobody wants to be around you. If that's all you do is spew anger and hatred, nobody wants to be around you. Because why? You bring them down. The Bible tells us that laughter is good medicine for the soul. When we're angry all the time and everything else, it begins to make us sick. It stresses us out. And our life becomes a mess. The Bible is very plain about it. If we are always frustrated and we continually just frustrate, guess what happens? We become a quarrelsome person. Somebody will tell you that the sky is blue and you'll tell them, no, it's not. I don't know where you're at, but it's not blue here. Well, it's raining out. Well, yeah, but I don't want it raining. I want it sunshine. Well, you got to have both. You can't have all of it. You got to accept it. And so many times we become frustrated with so much, and the next thing you know, nobody wants to be around us. We have bad attitudes. And Moses saw this, and he knew that the more that they began to grumble and complain, the more they got away from the heart of God. And Christians, we do the same thing. There are Christians, we are supposed to be rejoicing. And what happens? We begin to complain because things don't go our way. We get sick. Healing always comes to us. Sometimes not the way we like it, but it always happens because he tells us that it does. So, James in the New Testament was one of the first church leaders, and he was trying to give advice to the church. So in James chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, look at what he says. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. He's identifying who he is. And to the 12 tribes dispersed abroad, greetings. He says, I'm sending this to all of you. Here's what I want. Consider it a great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials. Really, take that verse out of the Bible. I don't want somebody to tell me that when I'm having a trial to be happy about it. That's not what he's saying. To be happy about it. He's talking about joy. We relate joy to happiness because look at what he says. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. You know what happens when you go through a trial? It gives you strength. Because pretty soon you're going to need that strength. Have you ever tried to run a marathon? Okay, as soon as church is over, we're going to line up at the door and we're going to run a marathon and we're going to see how well y'all do. Okay? I'm going to be out there on Jackson Lane, right where it goes out, and I'll be calling ambulances for all of you. Why? Because you can't just arbitrarily get up this morning and say, okay, I'm going to go run a marathon. Why? Because I'm not ready for it. I'm not prepared for it. And do you know that God knows what's going to happen to you tomorrow? And so the things that are happening to you today is to build up endurance for tomorrow, to give you strength. And if all we do is complain, it's like, remember when your mom and dad told you to clean your room? How long did it take you to do it? All week. Why? Because all week you just did nothing but complain about having to clean it. But once you finally did it, you did it within 5 to 10 minutes. Now, they didn't check underneath the bed to see all the dirty clothes and stuff, right? But it was presentable. But all week long, all we did was got irritated and everything and just getting mad when all we had to do was just clean it up. And then we learn, you know what? I can actually do this in a short period of time. It doesn't take that much. And what ends up happening? The relationship between my parents is not splintered. They're not screaming and yelling and hollering at me. Maybe they're taking me somewhere to get an ice cream or something else. But why were they preparing me for this? Preparing me for this because pretty soon I was going to be out on my own. And I needed to know how to clean my room. Otherwise, my house becomes a mess, right? And nobody's going to come in and clean it for me. And so God is trying to tell us, here, tomorrow there's this coming for you. He was trying to tell the children of Israel, we're going to take you here, and I'm going to put you over in the land that I promised you. And when you get over there, you need to be prepared for that. So I'm trying to bring you through the desert. And yes, you're going to face some hard times. Why? Because when you get over there, there's going to be enemies. They're going to be there to kill you. They want to kill you. They want to destroy you. But you need to have strength. And God was trying to tell them these things. So, go on. He says, and let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. A lot of people believe that maturity means age. Maturity does not mean age. Mature means perfect. What is God trying to teach us? He is trying to teach us to strive towards what? Perfection. Why? Perfection is what God wants. Guess what? Meet the goal and you're out of here. But so many times we're struggling. He says what will end up happening is, if we learn these perseverance, that what will happen is we will be able to be complete and lacking nothing. Lacking nothing. What do I need? At Christmas time, the same question. Dad, what can we get you for Christmas? Nothing. I don't need anything. I've got everything that I need. The only thing that I need is just a smile on your face and you to be there. That's all I need. Just some time. Because I'm not lacking anything else. The most precious gift that you can give me is something you can't borrow from anybody and you can't charge it. but it cost. And so we need to see this. James chapter 1, verse 12 through 15. Look at who it says. Blessed is the one who endures trials. Why? Because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. I don't know about y'all, but God's passing out crowns and I want them. So, verse number 13. No one undergoing a trial should say, I am being tempted by God. When the trial is there, God's not tempting you. He's giving you strength. He doesn't just let this happen and then leave you. Okay? You're not on a bicycle riding, learning how to ride, and God just giving you a push. Okay? He is your training wheels. He's the one that's got a hold of the handlebars. He's the one that's helping you to pedal. He's the one that's showing you how to brake. That's what he's doing. He doesn't just push you and leave you out there on your own. He says, because since God is not tempted by evil and he himself doesn't tempt anyone. So when somebody says that God is tempting you, God is not tempting you. Okay? Temptations are not from God. Temptations are from Satan. There's a difference between test and tempt. Okay? And so you need to understand this. We're talking about temptations. Okay? But look at what he says. But each person is tempted when? When they are drawn away and enticed by their own evil desire. We have two desires. The Bible says that man's thoughts are evil continuously. But then there's also the desire to please God, which God wants us to overpower the other desires. That's why he says, I want to make you a new creature by the renewing of your mind, so that his thoughts become your thoughts. His desires become your desires. And so what he's saying that what we need to understand is that I want not to be directed away from, for those that weren't here last week, we were talking about grace or being grateful. It uses the word charis, and I forgot, today was supposed to be communion so that we could share our thankfulness, and we're going to do it next week, okay? But when we start talking about the Eucharist, it's coming from the word of charis, of grace from God. The Eucharist talking about being the blood and the bread, or the breaking of his body. Okay? So in Numbers chapter 11, here comes the grumbling. Okay? And so let's go there in verses 1 through 15, and we'll read them real quick. Okay? Now the people began complaining openly before the Lord about hardship. How many people do that? Don't we all? God, I'm having a hard time paying my groceries. It used to only cost me $30. Now it's costing me $75. God, I remember when I could fill up my car for $25. And I took the van and got it filled up, $100. And it wasn't even empty. It still had a quarter of a tank. When it used to cost somewhere close to $40. Now it's about $120 to fill it up. And what do? He says that we start complaining openly. And I was openly complaining when I kept watching that ticker on that gas pump. Okay? But when the Lord heard, his anger burned, and fire from the Lord blazed among them and consumed the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was named Taberah, because the Lord's fire had blazed among them. The riffraff among them. You ever heard that word, riffraff? Didn't know it came from the Bible, did you? Then the riffraff among them had a strong craving for other food. The Israelites wept again, and they said, who will feed us meat? We remember the free fish we ate in Egypt, along with the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. That is some nasty food. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing to look at but this manna. And the manna resembled a quarter to, the seed, okay? And its appearance was like that of bdellium. I have no clue what this stuff is. I just know it's in the Bible, and I'm not eating it. And the people walked around, and what did they do? They gathered it. They ground it on a pair of grinding stones or crushed it in a mortar, then boiled it in a cooking pot and shaped it into cakes. It tasted like a pastry cooked with the finest oil. It doesn't even sound good. But they're eating this stuff, okay? And when the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall with it. Moses heard the people, family after family, weeping at the entrance of their teeth. The Lord was very angry. Moses was also provoked. So Moses asked the Lord. He says, why have you brought such trouble on your servant? Why are you angry with me? Why do you burden with all of these people? He says, did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth so you should tell me, carry them at your breast as a nanny carries a baby to the land that you swore to give them their fathers? He says, where can I get meat to give all these people? For they are weeping to me, give us meat to eat. He says, I can't carry all these people by myself. They are too much for me. He says, if you're going to kill, or if you're going to treat me like this, please kill me right now. You talk about being ungrateful, man alive. Because if I found favor with you and don't let me see, and don't let me see my misery anymore. Now Moses is complaining. First the people are complaining. Now Moses is complaining. Okay, God, you told me to get these people out, and I did. And now you're giving them food all the time, and all they're doing is complaining. And God, where am I going to get meat? I don't have any. God, why don't you just go ahead and kill me? Then I wouldn't have to worry about this anymore. So what's he doing? He's complaining. So when we begin to understand what exactly is the grumbling that's going on, you think about it. In Exodus chapter 17, we're not going to go there and read, but in Exodus chapter 17, Moses goes to God and he tells God, he says, look, he says, these people are grumbling and complaining so much among themselves that God, I don't have time to lead them. And God says, okay, appoint some people. Let them settle their difference. You do the leading. Your job is not to settle all of the grumbles and complaints. Your job is to lead the people. It sounds like a pastor sometimes. You got to settle all of the grumbling and everything, and you can't lead the people because everybody's fighting among each other, grumbling. Well, I don't get this or I don't get that. And here he says, Moses, again, he could have told you story after story after story, but he didn't. And so what do we understand? That grumbling is the complete opposite of gratitude. He says to grumble and to complain is to reject the grace of God. When we begin to grumble and complain, we're rejecting God's grace. So many times, I understand it's difficult to accept hardships. But you understand God's grace? No matter how bad you've got it, there's somebody out there that's got it worse. And there are times that we need to understand that God has a mission for you. We've talked about this. God has a mission for you. And there are things you're going to have to go through in order to get strength for that mission. And as long as we keep complaining and grumbling about it, we're never going to get there. What we're going to be, we're going to end up being grumpy old folks. I don't know about you, but I've seen some grumpy old folks. And sometimes we've all become that when we grumble and all of these things. And what happens, can I tell you? A lot of times grumbling takes on the shape, and we want to call it small sins. Sins like discontent. I'm not really satisfied with what God's given me. I want more. We come up with fussiness. Did you ever, how old are your children? 7, 4, and 1. And your name again is? Erica. Okay. So, in your parenting of these three children, I am sure that there are times that those children have been fussy. And you tried your best to give them something to appease them, and how well did that work? It doesn't last too long, and they come back being fussy, right? Don't we do the same thing with God? We become fussy, and we don't realize that we're sinning. You know, it's just a little small thing that we're not too satisfied with right now, Lord. But it begins to start doing these things. And then what ends up happening is gossip starts stirring. And then the next thing that happens, can I tell you something? If you start getting in with gossip, you start becoming a negative person. Gossip leads to negativity. And ulcers and all kinds of other things. And so what ends up happening is we become like Israel. We think that we would be better off dead than alive. And God's saying, no. I've got people that are going to come across your path that I need you alive for. Somebody that I need you to share with. Somebody that's hurting that I need you to bring comfort to. So quit complaining and understand, I've got this. I've got this. Because I know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't. And I'm trying to prepare you for that moment of when we can do these. And so let me finish with this. That grumbling rejects gratitude. And here's why. How many times has something happened to you and you use the three little words, why me, Lord? Why me? God, I go to church. I try to treat people right. I try to do things that are right, Lord. Why me? My next door neighbor over here is nothing but a loudmouth. All they do is curse all the time. They use your name in vain. They're always drunk or high or something else. They could care less about you, but I look and they've got everything. And Lord, I'm struggling. I'm just barely surviving. But I look at them and they seem to be so blessed. And we forget possessions aren't blessings. They can be, but a lot of times possessions are things that draw us away from God rather than bringing us to God. Because we thought we got it and we deserve it. Think about it. What if God's given you manna? And what do you say to him? I don't want manna, I want. We become the children of Israel. I don't want manna. I want meat. I don't want quail. I want something else. Deer meat, right? we want that. So you need to ask yourself today, and ask yourself this question. Because maybe you're stuck. And maybe you've been stuck here for a long time. Because all you keep asking God is this. Every day. Why? 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 And what's he saying? Trust me. Well, how do you know, Pastor? Because I have the same things. Why this or why that? You know? God, why don't people come? Why do people stay home? God, why don't they recognize that you have blessed us so much? I talked to my friend Ridwan over in Ghana. It is now getting close to summer there. It's getting hot, very hot in Africa. They don't have much food. They don't have Kroger's and Myers and Walmart. They struggle with just bread to eat. You know, we make, let's say you make $10 an hour or $15. I don't know what you make anymore, but let's say $15 an hour on an 8-hour day. That's $120, right? Your $120 in one day is about 2 to 3 times what they make in a month. Sometimes $10 a day is what they may make. And they got to survive with that. A house, a vehicle with gas, and you look at the price of gas. And we complain because we don't have the luxuries. And God's saying, I have blessed you so much. I ask you this. What are you doing? Are you grateful to God and thankful to God for what you got? Or are you always complaining that you want something more? When there's people out there that wish that they could just have what you have because they have nothing. So this morning, I say to you, if you've got an attitude of ingratitude, you need an attitude change. And you need to tell it to God right now. God, I am so sorry. I have become a complaining Israelite. And God, I don't want to be that. I want to be a grateful Christian.